At his own lavish wedding, the groom let guests mock his mother's fake military stories. He had no idea a Marine general was about to land a helicopter on the lawn to reveal her secret, heroic past. The setting sun painted the vineyards in hues of gold and rose, a perfect backdrop for a wedding engineered to be flawless. Inside the grand reception hall, a cathedral of glass and oak, the air hummed with the clinking of champagne flutes and the self-congratulatory laughter of the wealthy and influential. At table 17, tucked away near the service entrance and the buffet, sat Colonel, Rhett, Evelyn, Evie, Reed. At 78, she was a woman whose quiet presence was as out of place as a field sparrow in a cage of peacocks. Her simple, dark blue dress was clean and pressed, but it was decades old, a relic from a life of substance, not style. She was the mother of the groom, a title that seemed to afford her nothing more than a cheap, folded place card and a view of the back of the wedding cake. Her son, Michael, was the man of the hour. A rising star in the tech world, he had just married into a family whose name was synonymous with old money and political power. He moved through the room with a practiced, confident grace, his arm linked with his new bride, his smile as bright and polished as the silverware. Evie watched him, a familiar ache settling in her chest. She saw him embrace his new father-in-law, a portly man who ran a lobbying firm, and laugh heartily at a joke told by the bride's brother. He glanced towards table 17 once or twice, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes before he turned away. Evie was his liability. She knew it. In the carefully constructed narrative of Michael Reed, the self-made tech mogul, his mother was an inconvenient footnote. His father, a quiet history professor, had passed away years ago. That left only Evie, the woman with the vague past. She had tried to tell Michael bits and pieces over the years, stories of cold nights in undisclosed locations, of missions that had no names, of a life spent in the quiet, unseen service of her country. But to Michael, a man who dealt in data and verifiable facts, these stories were just stories. They were the fanciful ramblings of an old woman, embarrassing tales that didn't fit the sleek, modern brand he was building. "Is that his mother?" a woman at the next table whispered, her voice a sharp stage whisper. The one Michael said was some kind of government clerk. Her companion, a man with a gold watch that cost more than Evie's car, snorted. "Clerk. I heard she tells people she was a spy. Can you imagine? Bless her heart." The laughter was soft, but it landed like a physical blow. Evie just smoothed a non-existent wrinkle in the tablecloth and took a slow sip of her club soda. She was a ghost at her own son's celebration, a past he was trying to erase. The toasts began as dessert was served. First came the best man, Michael's college roommate, who spoke of all-night coding sessions and Michael's genius for disrupting the industry. He praised Michael's drive, his ambition, his ability to build a world from scratch, all on his own. The words hung in the air, each one a small, sharp erasure of the woman who had raised him, who had worked 2 jobs after her husband's death to ensure he could even go to college. Then came the bride's father, a man whose booming voice filled the hall. "We are not just welcoming a son into our family," he declared, raising his glass. "We are welcoming a legacy. A man of vision, of strength, of character. A man worthy of the name he now shares with my daughter." He spoke of family, of heritage, of the powerful lineage Michael was now a part of, never once acknowledging the matriarch of Michael's own line, sitting forgotten at table 17. The most painful moment came from the bride's uncle, a man named Stan who had had too much champagne and possessed too few boundaries. He staggered over to Evie's table, a broad, patronizing smile on his face. "So, Evie," he said, his voice loud enough to turn several heads. "Mike tells us you were in the military back in the day. Did you actually do any of the cool stuff, you know, jump out of planes? Or did you just type memos and make coffee for the real soldiers?" The question was a grenade of casual cruelty, tossed with a wink and a chuckle. The surrounding guests laughed along, enjoying the sport of cornering the quiet old woman with the strange stories. Evie looked up at him, her gaze clear and steady. The anger she felt was a distant, cold thing, buried under a mountain of sorrow. This wasn't about a rude guest, it was about her son. Her son, who stood across the room, had seen his uncle approach her, had heard the loud question, and had done nothing. He had simply turned away, engaging the wedding photographer in an animated conversation. He had chosen his new family's comfort over his mother's dignity. "Some of us served in ways that don't make for exciting stories," Evie replied, her voice soft but firm. "Ah, a paper pusher. I knew it." Stan roared, slapping the table in triumph. "No shame in that. Someone's gotta do the filing." More laughter. More knowing glances. Evie felt her heart, a tough, resilient muscle that had withstood pressures few could imagine, finally begin to crack. It wasn't the insult that hurt. It was the silence from her son. The silence was the real betrayal. The wedding devolved into a blur of loud music and forced merriment. The father-son dance was skipped entirely, replaced by a slideshow of Michael's life that, Evie noted with a hollow pang, contained not a single photograph of her. She had been edited out of her own son's history. That was enough. She wouldn't make a scene. She wouldn't confront him and ruin this perfect, expensive day he had built for himself. With a grace no one there had earned, she took a small, sealed envelope from her handbag. Inside was a simple card and the only photograph she had of herself with his father. On the front of the envelope, she had written, "For Michael." She quietly pushed her chair back, intending to leave the envelope on the gift table and slip out into the cool night air. She would disappear, just as she had been trained to do for most of her life. She was halfway across the manicured lawn, a silent shadow moving away from the glowing reception tent, when the world changed. It started not as a sight, but as a sound. A deep, rhythmic womp 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 that began as a faint tremor in the air and grew steadily, insistently louder. It was a sound utterly alien to a vineyard wedding, a sound of power, of purpose, of something immense approaching. The string quartet faltered, the DJ's upbeat music suddenly seeming trivial. Conversations died down as guests looked up from their phones, their expressions shifting from annoyance to confusion, then to alarm. Then they saw it. Descending from the dark sky, a matte black helicopter, sleek and menacing, with no identifying marks. It was not a civilian craft, it moved with the predatory precision of a military machine. It didn't land far away in a designated area. It descended deliberately, its powerful rotor wash flattening the grass and sending napkins flying from the outdoor tables, until it hovered just feet above the lawn, its shadow swallowing the entire reception. The side door slid open. 4 figures emerged, their movements economical and sharp. They were not in combat gear. They were in immaculate dress uniforms, gleaming medals on their chests. The man in the lead was tall and imposing, a Marine general in his late 60s, his face a mask of stern authority. He and his team marched directly towards the tent, their purpose clear and absolute. Their boots crunched on the gravel path, a sound that cut through the stunned silence of 200 wedding guests. The general's eyes scanned the crowd, bypassing the groom, the bride, and the wealthy in-laws, until they locked onto the small, solitary figure of the old woman standing at the edge of the lawn. Evie had frozen, the envelope still clutched in her hand. The general came to a halt before her. He did not smile. He simply looked at her, a lifetime of shared history in his gaze. Then, his voice, a commander's voice accustomed to being obeyed, boomed across the silent lawn. "Colonel Reed," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You are not dismissed." A gasp rippled through the crowd. "Colonel." The general gestured to his aides, who carried a large, sealed shadow box to the head table, the very table where Evie should have been seated all night. He then took the microphone from the stunned DJ. "Good evening," he said, his voice like cold steel. "My name is General Mark O'Connell, United States Marine Corps. I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but it has come to my attention that a matter of national record requires correction." His gaze fell upon Michael, the groom, who stood pale and trembling beside his bride. For 30 years, the general continued, this woman, Colonel Evelyn Reed, served this country in a capacity that few have the courage to even imagine. While others built careers and sought accolades, she operated in the shadows, in units whose names you will never hear, on missions whose success was measured by the fact that no one ever knew they happened. He opened a file and read, his voice clear and powerful. Declassified citation, Operation Clay Ash. Under extreme enemy fire, then Captain Evelyn Reed assumed command after her unit's leader was incapacitated. With complete disregard for her own safety, she coordinated the successful evacuation of 12 wounded personnel and 2 critical assets from a compromised embassy. Her actions directly prevented an international incident and saved every member of her team. The general looked up from the paper. I was one of those assets, he said, his voice thick with emotion. A young lieutenant who owes his life, and the lives of his men, to her command. He turned back to the crowd. She was recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross. The medal was awarded, but for reasons of national security, it was never presented. The record was buried. Until tonight. He opened the shadow box. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, was the medal, its silver gleaming under the party lights. The crowd was utterly silent, the previous mockery now a thick, choking cloud of shame in the air. The bride's uncle, Stan, looked as if he was about to be physically ill. Michael just stared, his face a canvas of dawning horror and regret, as if he was seeing his mother, truly seeing her, for the very first time. The silence was broken by a single person. One of the catering staff, an older man with a faded Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm, stood up straight and rendered a slow, respectful salute. Then another guest, and another. Soon, dozens of people in the room were standing, their applause growing from a tentative patter to a thunderous, rolling ovation, not for the bride and groom, but for the quiet woman they had all dismissed. Evie did not take the microphone. She did not seek the spotlight that was now, finally, upon her. She simply stood with a quiet grace that shamed everyone who had wronged her. Michael stumbled forward, his eyes full of tears. "Mom," he choked out. I didn't know." Evie looked at her son, and in her eyes, there was no anger, no, "I told you so." There was only a deep, tired, and unconditional love. "I know, Michael," she said softly. "That was the point. You were never supposed to have to carry it." She took a step toward him and gave him a brief, firm hug. A circle, broken for decades, was finally closing. When they pulled apart, she smiled faintly. She turned not to her son, but to the general, her old friend. "Mark," she said. "Would you do me the honor?" The general, his stern face softening, offered her his arm. Evie turned to the speechless DJ. "Do you have Unforgettable by Nat King Cole?" He fumbled with his laptop and a moment later, the timeless, elegant melody filled the hall. Evie and the general began to dance, a slow, graceful waltz. They moved with a shared rhythm born not of romance, but of a shared history of danger and duty. They were 2 old soldiers, taking a moment of peace they had more than earned, while the world they had protected watched in humbled silence. When the song faded, Evie walked back to her son. She pressed the sealed envelope into his hand. "Open it when you need to remember who you are," she said. Then, she turned, gave a final, small nod to the bride, and walked toward the waiting helicopter, her back straight, her honor restored. She left not as a forgotten mother, but as a hero finally seen. Weeks later, in Michael's sleek corner office, the Distinguished Service Cross sat in its shadow box on a prominent shelf. Beside it was a framed photo of his mother, not the quiet grandmother from the wedding, but a black and white image of a young, determined woman in fatigues, her eyes full of a fire he was only just beginning to understand. What makes a hero? Is it the medals they wear, or the silent sacrifices no one ever sees? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe.